Okay, let's dive into this. We hear this phrase all the time, right? The richest countries in the world. But have you ever really stopped to think about what that actually means? Or, who really gets to claim that top spot? It seems like a simple question, but the answer is way more fascinating than you might think.
So who is it? I bet you have a few names popping into your head right now. A huge global superpower, maybe? A country sitting on tons of natural resources? Well, the actual answer might just surprise you. Because before we can name a winner, we have to figure out how we're even keeping score.
And that brings us right to our first section. What does it even mean to be a rich country? To get to the bottom of this, we first have to understand the main tool that economists use to measure all this stuff.
Okay, the key term here is GDP per capita, with this little thing called PPP. Now, I know that sounds super technical, but stick with me, it's actually pretty simple. All it means is the average amount of economic value created per person in a country. And that PPP part, that's absolutely crucial. It stands for purchasing power parity, and it just adjusts the numbers for how much things actually cost in that country. So it's not just about how much money you have, it's about what your money can actually buy.
Here's the best way to think about it. Imagine a country's entire economy is one giant pie. Well, GDP per capita isn't measuring the size of that whole pie. Nope, it's measuring the average size of each person's individual slice. And this is so important because a country might have a massive pie, but if it has a billion people to share it with, each slice can end up being pretty small.
All right, so with that in mind, who comes out on top? The answer is a tiny little nation in the heart of Europe. Let's talk about the surprising champion, Luxembourg.
Get ready for this. Luxembourg's GDP per capita is a whopping $154,910. Just let that number sink in for a second. How is that even possible for a country with fewer people than many big cities?
Well, it turns out there's a kind of formula for this. See, Luxembourg is this huge hub for finance in Europe. They specialize in really high-skill, high-value stuff like banking and investment services. So they generate an enormous amount of money, and then, this is the key, they divide all that value among a very small population. You add in things like political stability and amazing infrastructure, and boom, you've got the recipe for the highest average wealth on Earth.
But hang on, here's where we need to dig a little deeper. Because while that number is technically correct, it absolutely does not tell the whole story. A single statistic, as powerful as it seems, can sometimes hide more than it reveals.
And this quote just hits the nail on the head. Remember, we're talking about an average. And what do averages do? They smooth everything out. A super high average wealth doesn't mean every single person is rich. It doesn't mean poverty is gone. And it definitely doesn't mean that money is shared equally.
So let's break this down. On the one hand, what the number shows is a country with high average wealth and a really strong economy. That's true. But what it hides is just as important. It can mask huge gaps between the rich and poor. It doesn't tell you that the cost of living there is incredibly high. And it says nothing about the quality of things like schools or healthcare. So you see, the number is just a starting point. It's not the final answer.
And to really get this, let's bring it all home and look at a country with a completely different story of scale and population. India. So let's look at India. Using that same exact PPP measure, its GDP per capita is around $11,940. That's the average slice of the pie for one person. And when you put that number right next to Luxembourg's, well, the contrast is just massive.
Now this slide makes it so visually clear, doesn't it? That gap is like a canyon between the two bars. But here is the critical mistake so many people make. They see this and they think, oh, India's economy must be small. That could not be more wrong. This chart is not showing you the size of the whole pie, it's showing you the size of the average slice. It's telling a story about population.
So, what's the real story here? India's total economy, the entire pie, is one of the largest in the world. It is absolutely enormous. But that incredible pie has to be divided among 1.4 billion people. It's sliced into over a billion tiny pieces. So even as the whole pie gets bigger and bigger, the average slice is still smaller. This is the unique challenge of a country with just unbelievable scale and diversity. Raising that average for everyone is a massive, long-term journey.
So where does all this leave us? Let's pull everything together for the biggest takeaway from all of this. It's really about redefining what rich actually means in the first place.
At the end of the day, one number just can't do it. It can't define a nation's true wealth. Being rich isn't just a number in a spreadsheet. It's also about quality of life, it's about fairness, it's about justice, and it's about the kind of opportunities that are available to every single person.
So, the next time you see a headline screaming about the richest country, here's a smarter way to think about it. A little checklist. First, check the metric. Are they using GDP per capita? Second, think about the population. Is it a huge country or a tiny one? Third, and this is a big one, question how that wealth is spread around. And finally, look past the money for those quality of life factors.
And that brings us to a final question, something for you to think about. If one economic number isn't enough, then what could be a better way to measure a country's true wealth? How do we measure the well-being of its people? It's a big question, and definitely something worth considering.